welcome everybody. No eating till we do the mochi.
No eating till we do the mochi now.
Good job, Harold.
Not my place, otherwise.
Okay, now husband couldn't make it, but he will be up again. I remember that.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Allied meeting today. We're glad you're here, members and visitors. We're going to start off with the pledge, followed by the Hamosi. Please rise.
Aye.
Present arms. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Order. Arms. You may be seated.
Have your attention, please. Baruch atah Adonai,
Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen.
Play ball. So we'll begin in just a few minutes. You're welcome to continue, Josh. We just encourage you to wear your badge so we get to know everybody here. A lot of new faces. I'm Eddie Garcia, the post commander for Post 256, and we're glad to welcome the Dallas National Historical Society, the JWVA, our auxiliary post. And we'll start in just a few minutes, but again, just continue. We're glad you're here, and enjoy the night. How you been? Good? Always good. What's that, sir?
You're the eternal optimist.
They know I'm just, this is my business career, year of my business career. I just did a $1 million deal that closed last week. So in my early years, it was a $3 million deal, $500,000 deal. I'm doing better for this year. I would have my best year, my year career this year. So it's enough. And I enjoy it. What do you got? What do you do these days? He just had his first. No, I don't know. Are you still after the cigarette truck?
Yeah, I lost my medical. I'm outside.
Did you get your medical back?
Yes, you do. You're a big volunteer. I'll move you ahead of
You go 62? You go 62? My God.
Don't tell him anything. So he's going to try to
No, Harold, no. That's one thing I'm not going to do. I don't like heights. My son does that. Asked me to do it. He does it outside. He asked me to go with him. I said, no, Harold. There's a few things I'm not going to do. Climbing up 50 feet up a rock. Harold, Ed, you're a sailor. This is a big room. Look at the temperature.
This is the normal we don't have too many He's very active in the Air Force Association. Yeah, he needs to be a member. He's a friend of mine. He's in Air Force. He's an E7 or E8. And he's also very, he's the membership chairman for the Air Force Association for Texas. So he's extremely active with us in the Air Force Association. He's not even a member. We need to make sure he's a member because he's very active in the military. And he's Jewish. And probably nobody aggressively asked him to join. So we have a few people like him. Now, there's a few people. The guy.
I got a bunch of guys where I live and you ask them, we're not going to drive 25 miles.
Well, I think you and I talked about that. You actually have, remember, you just did the rabbi at the security series. And I thought we had talked about maybe opening up like a second meeting location. Would that not work? You don't think that would work? Even if we did a convening for them? Devil's advocate. We had a small meeting. I mean, you meet at your facility. Why not just do it at your facility?
Well, we have a veterans group there.
You told me that.
Our monthly meeting.
Yes, sir.
Maybe 3 or 5 groups that there's a lot more guys. Listing is basically raising money twice a year. Funds for veterans groups. And sure.
That money comes from your government. That's great.
We don't know what's going to happen this year. The golf cart was sold to this big company out of Dallas. And in the past, we always get donated so we don't have to pay the money out. We use that to give away. So this group is talking about maybe not like bringing your school. Therefore, we would be giving away $5,000 to
How many golfers you know here? How many golfers you know?
We have a match. I think it's like 40.
Can you match that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, we match out. Since it's been going on, maybe 6 or 7 years, we have given away over 300 grand.
That's phenomenal. That very good. That's a successful. You've been involved in charge of? You've been actively involved in charge of?
Since I've been there, yeah, I go.
That's great.
I don't use it right in my backyard. Nothing wrong. I help raise the money. Stay in the tournament.
What course again is this here? Cisco Lake. I can't remember the name of the company that bought it out. They're out of Dallas. They own about 60 people. They own 2 or 3 or 4. Play golf? You're smart. He just rock climbs. Golf is done Actually, I'm involved only because like the Air Force Association, this one we have a golf tournament where this year we're going to raise almost some money. We're going to raise about $100,000 because we're partnering with the Veterans Center of Cumberland County. They have a golf tournament. They closed their golf tournament because they got sold. So the Ross, who was the chair of that golf tournament, said, "I'll move all my sponsors to your tournament." So it's like a matter of heaven. So he's moving about 70,000 sponsors to our golf tournament, and we're doing it in Heritage Ranch. So we're going to raise $100,000, and the money goes towards staying in Texas. So it goes towards whatever the military families in Texas. But we do a golf tournament, and it's been going on for about 24 years. But the Veterans Center.
Okay, everybody, you're welcome to continue to socialize. Can I have your attention, please? Again, we want to thank you for coming this morning. Great speaker, and we're happy you're here today. Before we introduce our guest speaker, I did want to acknowledge we have a few different associations in the room. I'd like to call Mr. Paul Hendricks for just a moment so he can say a few words.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to be with you all this morning. I'm looking forward to the presentation and always looking forward to meeting you all. So my name is Paul Hendricks. This is my wife, Chris. And I know several of you here from prior experiences that are always been very positive. I'm a member of the Everett Space Force Association, or AFA. There we go. Bob is one of our members also. It's been a whole show. And we are in the process of preparing for the anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. The end of the Vietnam War officially was on the 28th of January, 1973. We are having a celebration to honor and recognize the end of the Vietnam War, to recognize the 3.4 million men and women that participated in the war, to recognize the 58,000, and remember the 58,000 men and women that lost their lives, to recognize the 591 prisoners of war that were released during the March, April, May time frame in 1973, and to remember the 1,600 men and women that have never returned, missing in action. So we're having a meeting on the 21st of March. I'm going to have some flyers for you here. It's there's no charge to come to the meeting. It will be held at the Frontiers of Flight Museum, right over here by Love Field. It's just down the road here. And we would like each and every one of you to come. If you're a Vietnam veteran, if you're a surviving spouse, if you're a spouse, or you're just a patriot, we would just love to have you come. This is going to be a fantastic occasion. It's going to be well recognized, and Vietnam veterans will receive a pin to remember and honor their support. So I'll pass these around. I would really look forward to seeing each and every one of you come. So look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to turn the program over to Deborah Skolaski. Polsky.
Happens all the time. Hi, I'm Deborah Polsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. And I want to welcome you to our Jim Schwartz annual lecture series event about Love Norm. Ongoing for well over 10 years, bringing in locally and nationally known speakers on subjects of interest to the Dallas Jewish community, our annual lecture series has been designed to bring information and awareness of aspects of Jewish and Southern history and culture. In 2019, we renamed our series to honor Jim Schwartz of blessed memory, the 2012 through 2016 president of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. His community interests were many, but he will be remembered most for his work with the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. You know what, Jeanette, can you ask Jenny if we can get a microphone? A microphone. Sorry, I thought my teacher voice was loud enough, but apparently not. A strong leader, Jim Schwartz, is remembered for the remarkable strides made at the Dallas Jewish Historical Society during his 4-year tenure as president, maintaining strong fiscal responsibility, offering meaningful and successful programs and fundraising events, and being instrumental in moving the organization forward in delivering full archival digitization. And we're always very happy that the Jewish War Veterans and the Jewish War Veterans Auxiliary have placed in our trust their archival materials, and we're so happy to have them be a part of the archive. The Jim Schwartz Annual Lecture Series and the Dallas Jewish Historical Society is proud to present to you Dr. Norm M. Shulman. Norm Shulman's relationship with his stepson, Greg Levinson, always stable and warm, evolved when Greg decided to enlist in the Air Force at age 27. Cognizant of past anti-Semitic stereotypes persisting about Jewish participation in the military, Norm wanted to help prepare Greg to feel comfortable in his own identity. So Norm decided to write letters connecting Greg to the many Jewish military heroes who had preceded him. From Judah Maccabee to fighter pilots, from today's recent history, these profiles in heroism brought Greg foundation and strength. Norm's letters to Greg make up one core of Love Norm. The other is Norm's own multi-generational story of Jewish military heroes. As the son of Jewish immigrants whose place in America was hard-won, Norm chronicles what it was like to feel his identity pulled in different directions and how to hold fast to it nonetheless. Love Norm is a retelling of profiles of famous Jewish fighters from across history, and a singular story of how one man found pieces in his own past to preserve his Jewish identity. Together, empathetically channeled through heartfelt letters and remembrances, Love Norm shares a collective wisdom with the next generation. And his lovely book, Love Norm, will be available for sale after the event for a mere $25. And he will sign them for you. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Norm.
The nicest thing about being here is if I use a Yiddish term, I won't have to translate it. This is you're the first Jewish audience I've spoken in front of since the book came out. I've pretty much been in Lubbock for the last 32 years, and my publisher is Texas Tech Press. It did an outstanding job getting my book out, and they're continuing to promote it and distribute it. But this is a special opportunity for me because I'm among my Luntsmen. So, and I have a special regard for our veterans who are here today. I think what I'm going to say is going to help people who don't know much about Jewish military history appreciate them even more. History balances on the head of a pin. And how I got to Lubbock well, you're about to hear how unusual this is. I'd spent about 8 years in Concord, New Hampshire, working crisis intervention out of a general hospital. And I was trained to do crisis intervention also in institutions. So if there was a shootout at a school or some kind of hostage situation, I was called in to help deal with that. In 1986, to top that off, Krista McAuliffe went down in the shuttle mission, and she was a teacher at Concord High School. So because of my experience working with those other events, I was immediately called in to the school. Okay, so that was in late January of '86. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry about my voice, I'm a little froggy. I can hold it. Feel more like a rock star now. 86, I was spent. I'd never been more exhausted from doing my work. The institutional stuff is so much more intense than working with individuals or families. So I decided to go on a cruise, and I went on the Norway and with a friend, a male friend, and we had assigned seating in those days. You couldn't sit everywhere. So I was unattached. I'd never been married. I was 38 years old. Earlier in life, I knew that I would never have biological children, but I was open. And this is conversations I had with myself, and I don't know where that came from, but it was there. So at 22, I remember just knowing I wasn't going to have kids, but stepkids was something that I was very open to. Anyway, I had none of this in mind when I got on that ship. I just wanted to relax. So I get seated at a table of 6 with my friend. Across the table from me was Carol Levinson, Greg's mother, Greg, and his grandmother was there. And what's interesting about her, and this ties in with the story, is that Greg's grandmother was among the first, in the first regiment of Navy waves to serve in World War II. They started a train in Los Angeles, went east through Amarillo. She's from Tulia, Texas. She said, after Pearl Harbor, she's going. So Opal has always been an inspiration for Greg. Carol is a Jew by choice, but I was very much accepted into her family and to the Lubbock community. So I'm sitting across from this beautiful woman, we're about the same age, and Greg, and after the first day, she got up and she went to the person who was coordinating the seating and said, "I want to be moved. I don't want to sit with a shrink for a week." So they couldn't move. She tried it the second day. The second day, she does the same thing. They can't move her. So she's stuck there with me. On the third day, I don't know what happened, but everything changed. My future was laid out in front of me, and we developed a relationship during that week, and I just knew I was going to be part of this family. This was in 1986. It took me 4 years to get to Texas, or 4 years to get to Lubbock. But a real quick aside, I remember after that week on the ship with her, she was in the process of divorce, and so I left it up to her to decide if she wanted this to go ahead. And I remember coming home Sunday, my door was locked, and I had all these groceries and newspapers, and the phone rang, and I knew it was her, but I couldn't get in the door. So I was fumbling around for the key. I was loaded up and just dropped everything. Opened the door, and on the last ring, I picked it up. It was her, and then I knew my destiny was set. So we had a long-distance relationship for 4 years. I had to get relicensed in Texas, which is not easy, and eventually started a practice in Lubbock. Greg and I, the bond was as instantaneous with him as it was with her. He was 7 years old when I met him, and we just hit it off. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. And I knew at that time that I was committed. I don't know if you all know this. I gave a talk at Literary Lubbock a couple months ago, And I talked about how there's no word in biblical Hebrew. There is a word for step-parent in modern Hebrew, but in biblical Hebrew, there's no word for stepfather. And the idea is that if you're going to do it, you're going to do it or not. And I love that about the ancient Jews in terms of their language. There's always a subtle message in what they're trying to convey through language. And I always felt from very early on that I was his father. His father was alive. I got along with him, but his father wasn't as heavily identified as being a Jew. And so I'm the one who did all the Hebrew studies with him, along with a bunch of other kids in the community, because we had a small synagogue there, and there were times when we haven't had a rabbi, and I've always had to fill in. I just did a month ago my third funeral, because they couldn't get a rabbi to come in early enough. And so when I was up there talking to the folks, I said, if there are any other old Jews up there, they better go first, because I'm not doing another one of these. I'll go first. Let me go first. I assisted with the circumcision, and I mean, it's just stuff that you just do. I didn't do the actual surgery. Lucky kid. But I was there. I was holding a flashlight, and then I did the prayers for it. And you just do that. I mean, I taught confirmation for 5 years, which was fabulous. It was a great experience. I had like 3 or 4 kids a year. That's how small the shul was. There are less than 100 Jews in Lubbock of a population of 250,000. So your identity, you feel differently about who you are when you're reminded of it frequently. I was telling Deborah a story about how when Greg was in junior high school, they sent home a sheet of paper with satanic symbols that they wanted the parents to be careful that their kids weren't wearing. And we were going down the list, and on the bottom left, I'll never forget, it was a Star of David. So we had to correct them. Every year, they always scheduled exams during the High Holy Days. Rabbi Stein at that time had to correct them. Didn't matter. The next year was the same thing. Little things like that. But I always found a way to turn it into something positive. To let Greg know, this is who he is, and it's going to make him stronger eventually. If he ever needed it, he was going to have this to fall back on. I was very conscious of that, even before he expressed an interest in the military. Anyway, Greg's interest in the military was no different than any other kid who's bivouacked in the backyard or played with guns or, got interested in war movies. Very normal. Didn't see this coming at all. Greg graduated, he did get a pilot's license in high school. And I'll tell you, the good thing about a kid who has a passion, if they really have a passion, they're not going to misbehave, especially if the FAA is watching you. So when he decided to become a pilot, his behavior became easier to manage because he was not about to lose that license for anything. Okay, so he has a pilot's license. He was flying small airplanes. Goes to the University of Texas. No talk about the military. No talk about ROTC. After graduation, he started working at the Bank of Las Vegas in Las Vegas, New Mexico, for 5 years. And at the end of the 5 years, at the 5th year, he said, "I want to fly the F-16." And I said, "Really?" But I never doubted it. It didn't seem like preposterous. There's something about his confidence when he said that you can believe in your kid. And believe me, for him, there was no backup plan. He was going to fly a single-seat fighter, and nothing was going to stop him. he had a good friend in the New Mexico Air National Guard who kind of showed him the ropes, but there's no nepotism when it comes to being a pilot. So he applied for a position with the New Mexico Guard. He got accepted for training, passed all the preliminary stuff, and started his training at Vance Air Force Base in Eden, Oklahoma. So one day we're having a conversation about how it was, and he was being given a really hard time by one of the instructor pilots, and he needed some extra support. He said, you know, Norm, he said, I feel like I'm the only Jew on this base of over 900 men. And I said, and when he said that, this is hard to believe, but it's true. This popped into my head. I imagine the Star of David with, I wanted Greg to feel like that he had something underneath him that was strong, that he would be able to use as he struggled with his training. So we start with Judah the Maccabee, of course, who's the foundation. And I went through every war that America was in. And on the left side, you can see the countries that they served in. I did not want it to just be an American thing, because the stereotype about Jews not serving in the military is international, and it goes back to the 1600s. That's when it started, because Jews were allowed in the military. Up to that time, Jews were very isolated, and then the Renaissance came about, and kings were fighting other kings, and they needed conscripts, and so they said, okay, we'll give you guys a chance. But at the same time, the anti-Semitic stereotypes started, because there was already a long history of anti-Semitism that they had to deal with, and it translated into the military. But we have our military heroes going back in various countries in Europe, going to the 17th century. I didn't go back that far. But I started at the American Revolution, the Civil War, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and at the very top is Greg. This came to mind. Now, in order to fill this, which was easy, by the way, I would set it aside. I decided to write letters to him and attach these figures to each letter. And believe me, I did not have a book in mind. So every week for a year, I wrote him a letter. And on Thursday afternoon at my office, the office manager and I would shut down all the building, all the business, and we got online and we did our research to find people to fill the star, and then tell the stories that were easily accessible when you Google them. So every week he got one or more of stories about these people. So I have a little intro, and I write the letter, and then I'd have the story at the end. So I get the book, the first draft of the book done, and I couldn't get it through a historian who's on the Star, by the way. I should have reminded him. He may have given me a pass earlier. So in order to get it through, my editor said, I have to make it my story. I have to weave my own story, which I didn't think was very interesting, throughout the book. Because people want to know who I am and why I wrote it. And so I was able to do that and got approval. Last July 27th, it was released. So thank you. Thank you. I may not be that smart, but I am persistent. So anyway, I started out doing the research to help him, but then the more I got into it, I started seeing these stories about the obstacles that Jewish veterans had that non-Jewish veterans didn't. These things that would occur, and then how the stereotype was used to support anti-Semitic feelings. And I decided I have a second reason for doing this, and that's to tell their story. I wanted to tell Greg's story, but I wanted to tell the story of these people that I'm running into. Now, not all of them are lost to history. There are names up here. This will kill you. I hope I don't get in trouble. This is Robert Rosen's book about the Jewish Confederates. Wow. And yeah, exactly. I've got a story about this. A friend of mine, my sister's best friend, is from New Orleans, and we're having a conversation about my book. And she was telling me how much my sister's mother-in-law hated her because she had a thick accent. She was from New Orleans. And she would never accept the fact that she was Jewish. And I said to Pat, Pat, boy, she really would have been surprised if she knew about the Jews that fought for the Confederacy. And Pat said, there were no Jews who fought for the Confederacy. So you can see that anti-Semitism was kind of flipped on its head there in one sentence, or two sentences. So what's interesting about this is not only were Confederate Jews not thought of, but by 1896, 30 years after the Civil War, there was talk that no Jews at all served in the Civil War. So a Baltimore newspaperman went to work and found the names of 7,000 Union soldiers and 3,000 Confederate soldiers. And the reason he was able to do that is when you went in, you had to tell which chaplaincy you were going to use. So it was history. It was very touching. One of them was Adolf Proskauer. Now, Adolf Proskauer was from Prussia, and he wanted to be in the officer corps. Some guys, like Greg, are just genetically wired to do this. He was a leader. He was a military guy. Prussia, of course, is the part of Germany where their officer corps usually comes from. He didn't have a chance as a Jew. So what does he do? He comes to America to get in the army. He comes to Charleston, and the war starts. He proved himself as a leader, and he became a major. And this picture is a depiction of him at Gettysburg. He led the 12th Alabama Regiment at Gettysburg. He was known by his men who loved him as the Jew Major. Of course, you couldn't get away from him. But this is living proof or a documentary proof of our participation. I found the names of 2 full-bird colonels. No general officers in the Confederacy, but 2 full-bird colonels. And last but not least, found the names of 2 volunteer rabbis who provided a chaplaincy for the Jewish Confederates. So much for that stereotype. Fast forward, World War II. I'm going to skip over World War I for now. But in World War II, the word was in us. I don't know if you know this, but Jews weren't allowed to emigrate to Australia freely until 1945. And prior to that, they did let Jews serve, but the word was that there weren't any who served in World War II for New Zealand or Australia. All right, well, another Jewish newspaper man accepted the challenge and wrote a book called Jewish Anzacs. He listed all 396 guys who served with distinction for both countries. So we always have a reaction. I don't know if it really changes sentiments or stereotypes, probably not. But we're not going to let it go undocumented anyway. There's proof. So the other thing that motivated me to broaden the story beyond Greg was when I was like 11 or 12 years old, I saw a movie called Gentleman's Agreement. Is everybody,
Gregory Peck.
I'm sorry?
Gregory Peck.
Gregory Peck passed himself off as a Jew and went underground, sort of, and because he wanted to write about what it was really like, and of course he was able to pull it off. But when I saw the movie as a kid, I remember this, there were 6 scenes in which that struck me. As a child who had not experienced anti-Semitism, I had lived with 2 uncles who served in the military, never said a word about it. My father was in World War I, believe it or not. That's another story. My grandfather was born in 1845.
Oh my God.
Both of them were in their 50s when they had us. So he could have served in the Civil War if he weren't in Poland. Anyway, there is a website that provides every screenplay you would ever want. And I said, well, let me see if I can recall these scenes. So I ordered it. I have it, and I picked out three passages real quick that that really struck me as a kid that I remembered. Anybody remember John Rankin, a Mississippi Democrat? He was a senator. Anyway, they're talking about Rankin. John Rankin, Mississippi Democrat, stood up in the House to denounce the administration-backed soldiers' vote bill. Wait a minute, here it is. Here's what he said. And the chief broadcaster for it is Walter Winchell, the little kike I was telling you about the other day. Now, I didn't hear that word very much growing up, but this struck me as it just kind of registered. And then it came out later when I was thinking about putting the book together. Here's another passage. McEnany is one of the characters. When I was stationed at Guam, our CO used to talk to us about it. Quite a liberal, that fellow. And said, and McEnany looks at Green and says, you were in public relations, weren't you? And then Phil Green, Gregory Peck, what makes you think I wasn't a GI? Huh? Oh, for goodness sakes, Green, don't get me wrong. Why, some of my best, and then Gregory Peck's girlfriend says, I know, dear, and some of your other best friends are Methodists, but you never bother saying it. Skip it, Phil, flag the waiter. Okay, and finally, Gregory Peck gets together with a childhood friend who experienced anti-Semitism in the military. They get together at the end of the movie. And they're talking about how it makes them feel and how helpless they are at certain times when these things are said. He said, Dave says, the only other thing that makes you want to murder is this story. There was a boy in our outfit, H. Schlussman, good soldier, good engineer. One night we got bombed and he caught it. I was 10 yards off. Somebody said, give me a hand with his sheeny. Before I got to him, he was dead. Those were the last words he ever heard. Now, I was impressionable. I'm a movie nut still. And I just thought of this as a backdrop for what I was doing and why it was important for me to stretch the story out. So I put the letters together with the stories. I'm going to tell you some of them. Okay, I skipped World War I. This is World War I. This is interesting. This is on a Jewish plane. It was a symbol. It meant something different. It's also backwards. But there were 3 Jewish pilots who won Iron Crosses, who were aces, and here are 2 of them. And well, you can read about who they are, but they were very, very skilled pilots, and they were deadly. They were the best. And even in spite of the fact that they won Iron Crosses, when Jews served, over 100,000 Jews served in the German army, 12,000 KIA killed in action, and 35,000 were bemedaled because they had to prove something. 1/3 of every Jew that served was given some medal in Germany. Of course, it didn't matter when the Holocaust came. It didn't matter if you had an Iron Cross. They took them anyway. These guys were able to survive because Hermann Goering was a pilot in World War I and knew them and respected them. It's a bizarre twist on history, but that's how they were able to survive. Go to the next one. All right, this is my Uncle Milt. Uncle Milt, I'm going to kvel a little bit. He didn't want to be a medic. He said they were in the push during the Battle of the Bulge. They were running out of medics. They were taking heavy casualties, and they lined guys up, and they said, well, every third or fourth one is going to have to learn how to be a medic because we don't have enough. And Milt's looking up and down the line, and he figures we're going to get him. And he grabbed the guy next to him. He pulled him over and stood it, but he got caught. He said, I don't want to wear a Red Cross helmet. I want to carry a rifle. And he was a great patriot. He was very active with the 6th Armored Division his entire life, and he won the Bronze Star. Oh, this story received mixed reviews. 1 week after the book came out, I started collecting vignettes of incidents that occurred after the book was published. The first thing that happened, 1 week after the book came out, this is in early August, a cousin called me from Maryland and said, do you know the story about Uncle Milt's, his father's watch? And I said, no, he never told me the story. Did anybody recognize what kind of watch that is? Any of the veterans? It's a watch from a German pilot who was downed, was killed. And Uncle Milt took the watch, and he wore it for the rest of his life. And some people didn't like hearing that. They thought I don't know what they expected him to do, but he wore it as a symbol of Jewish resilience. We're still here, and you're not. And he serviced it with parts his entire life, and had it until he died in 2010. So, and it's been passed down to the next generation in my family because of that story. He never told me that story, and I was with him many times when he was wearing the watch. In fact, most of the veterans I talked to, what's cool about them is that they wouldn't offer stories, but if you asked them, they never said, I don't want to talk about it. And that's what helped me generate a lot of these stories, because people talked about it. This is Opal Keith. This is Greg's maternal grandmother, who is not Jewish, but she was in the 1st Regiment of Waves. 70 years after she wore that uniform in 43, she wore the same uniform in her church when they honored the veterans. It's the same uniform. Here she is talking. It is. Here she is talking about it, and her husband Bill, it was in the army, was captured during the push into Germany, and he spent 3 months in a POW camp, and he has his own testimony that he gives when he talked to churches. He's neither one are with us now. All right, I got to tell you about it. That's my dad, born in 1898. That picture was taken in 1918. He was an immigrant, came to America in 1909 after the Great Pogrom in Bialystok in 1908. He's an eyewitness to that pogrom, and you can read about it if you Google it online. It's horrific. But that was enough to convince my grandfather to get his kids out, my father being one of them. So my father gets drafted, and he was not proud of his service. He was only in a few months. When he made PFC, he quickly lost it. And I said, well, Pop, how could you be in for 3 months and they give you a stripe and they take it back? He said, I didn't like being told what to do. So he said that he was like that. He was he's a very colorful character. But what was interesting, when I did some research, my dad was at Fort Hancock, New Jersey. And there were two significant things that happened while he was there that he never talked about. One, Spanish flu. It was in the epicenter, right outside of New York. And he never talked about that. He was resistant, immune, whatever. 8,400 guys died around him in that area. Wow. At Fort Hancock and in the vicinity. And the other thing that happened, I said, what did you do when you were in the Army? He said, I cleaned the big guns, the 18-inch guns that guarded New York Harbor. And I know that sounds anachronistic because they actually had to protect the harbors up until World War I. And so he never said this, what I'm about to tell you. So one fine day, I think in August of 18, a very bold German submarine captain decides to take some shots at Fort Hancock. So they fired on Fort Hancock with their deck gun, and fire was returned by the guns that my father had cleaned. They didn't hit it, no one got hurt, the sub went on, and no one got killed, but the fact is that he didn't think enough to tell us those two stories. This is Greg's. This guy hated my guts because he loved my wife. Greg's grandfather had a story. Greg wanted to record what happened to him, and he played it for us on a trip between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And his name is Sam Levinson. He was lieutenant. He flew in a airborne. I think it was a DC-3. Carried 20 guys, the two pilots and 20 guys seated. I've been in one, so I know what it looked like. Yes. Yeah. So Sam did want to talk, and he said, "What do you want to hear?" He was real gruff, and he didn't want to tell the story. And Greg is goading him on this tape, and finally he gave in. And I never heard him talk like the way he did. But on a mission, on an airborne mission, he said they sent out 36 of these planes, each with 20 guys, and only 18 returned. And he knew the people who were flying in the other aircraft. And it was so moving to hear him talk about it, to see a different side of him, to understand why he didn't want to talk. But Sam was bemedaled for the courage that those guys showed to fly into AAA, anti-aircraft, and artillery. Oh, this guy. His name, General James Breedlove. I think of anybody that Greg knew in this entire story, he was the one who was most influential. Because Jim, we flew in Vietnam out of Thailand. He had 160 missions. I said, Jim, what was your favorite part of being in the service? And he said, being a commander of a combat unit. And he flew the F-4, and every time he saw Greg, he was always generous with his information. It was very encouraging. And Greg at one time had a very difficult time, again, and he thought he was on the edge of getting thrown out of the pilot program, and he really wasn't. And Jim just looked at him and, with all seriousness, said, "They're not going to get rid of a perfectly good pilot," and they didn't. Bernie Barish, the only Jew in this B-29 group. He was a top gunner. Again, he wouldn't offer it, but he would answer all the questions. He served in combat, shot down a Japanese Zero over Singapore, and he survived the war. And he was extremely proud of his service. Oh, this story. This is a killer story. This guy's name is Dr. Jerry Jacobs, who was an oral surgeon. And Jerry's wife, lovely woman, and 2 daughters, lovely girls, had zero interest in what he had done in the military. Before Jerry died, he wrote a 118-page diary of what he did over there. And his wife gave that to me. I mean, the original copy, which I want turned into the War Museum. It was like, it didn't mean that much. But he didn't have to become a pilot. He didn't have to fly a P-51. But I wanted to read you one passage from his book, from my book, well, from his book. Let's see. Here it is. This is Jerry. This is from Jerry's biography, or autobiography. We had just arrived over the battle area when the ground control using radar vectored us toward a large enemy fighter force heading toward the battle area. Before long, we were in the midst of a whirling air battle with German Messerschmitts 109s and Focke-Wulfs 190s. This was it, my first encounter with the enemy. I was able to immediately recognize the ME-109s and the FW-190s, and the thing that really made my eyes bulge was seeing the big Iron Cross insignia on their aircraft. I couldn't believe that I was now face to face with someone who was going to try to kill me. My brain automatically shifted gears, going from standby to full alert. This was for real, and I felt that I was ready. I had no feeling of fear or anger, but one of great excitement. As I look back, I realized I was cool and there was no panic. Just a job to do. All of my senses were on alert. It was my job now to get one of the enemy in my gun sight and destroy him. I knew that it was the enemy who was here for the same reason, to destroy me. I mean, it's the whole book is like that, and it would have been lost to history if Shirley hadn't given it to my sister because she knew I was writing the book. But I treasured every page of that, and hopefully it'll end up somewhere. Greg's 44, so we'll see. By the way, somebody said, hey, you didn't mention that Jerry Jacobs was an oral surgeon. And I said, plenty of Jews are oral surgeons. How many of them flew the P-51? Anybody know who this is?
Robert Tuck.
Yes. Thank you. You know who he was?
I learned how to read a lot.
Robert Tuck is indisputably the greatest Jewish fighter pilot who ever lived. And the way I found him, there was a website when I was doing my research called Jews at the Battle of Britain. Believe it or not, somebody went to the trouble. And so I'm scrolling down, and I'll let you read it yourself, I hope. And everybody's got a little bit, you know, an inch or two of text. He had like 2 pages. I mean, it was incredible what he did. Look at this.
Kills. Those are kills.
He was not done. He had 35 altogether.
Wow.
30 he was credited for. The other 5, you had to have a witness. He said he had 5 others. Now, the thing about Tuck, oh, by the way, this picture was taken after he had spent 3 years in a prisoner of war camp. And what he did when he got out of the prisoner of war camp, what did he do? He got back in the cockpit. He was, his nickname was Lucky, because he survived 2 mid-air collisions in training, and he was shot down 4 times.
Oh my God.
The 4th time he ended up in the prison camp. Now, so they called him Lucky Tuck. So when Greg, on the day that Greg was supposed to give his, get his call name, the guys got together, and you know, sometimes they give you a call name. Anybody have a call name in here that they're willing to admit? What is it?
Sandman.
Sandman. Yeah. Anyway, sometimes it's done in jest, and other times it fits your character. Well, the guys got together, knew enough about Greg being Jewish, knew a little bit about history, and they gave him the call name Glick. So history was connected from Tuck to Greg with the same call name. Both single-seat fighter pilots. Here are a couple others that served at the Battle of Britain. This guy, Andy Mamedoff, was part of a group of Americans that went before the war, before we entered the war. He was one of the guys who violated immigration laws. I think he went to Canada, and then he wanted to fly. And he got himself a Spitfire, and like 2 days after that picture was taken, that's his plane that had the holes in it. He was killed. So I think he might have been the first pilot killed, a Jewish pilot killed in World War II. This guy, Ziggy Klein, was a Pole from Warsaw, and when the war started, he went west trying to get in somebody's Air Force. The French wouldn't take him. Goes to Britain. He gets a plane, and Ziggy was a little bit like my dad, and had trouble taking orders. So one day there was a German spotter plane that was over close to their base, and the guys were specifically told not to just let it go. And Ziggy had just heard got word that his family had been taken to the camps and was in no mood to tolerate any Germans at this point. He actually got into an airplane against orders, went up, shot it down, and came back. All right. They wanted me to put some more women in here besides Opal. Anybody know who she is?
She was one of the night
Yes,
nurses.
Lydia. Oh, that says it. Her name is Lydia Litvak. The Russians had an all-woman fighter group called the White Lilies of Stalingrad. She was the only Jew in the unit, and she shot down 12 German planes.
Wow.
When she was killed, they never found her body or plane. She died in an engagement, and Stalin did not want to give her a medal, the Hero of the Soviet Union, which is equivalent to our Medal of Honor. And even though it was Stalin, people put up enough of a fuss because she was such a superb pilot that they gave it to her. But she was very diminutive, and just had what it took. This guy's name is Abrams, and he served in the British Army, and he was one of the most highly decorated. He's in the top 5 of decorated British soldiers, and his story is quite remarkable. Really good kid. Another woman, Frances Slanger. U.S. Army nurse, killed right after D-Day. The only women that were allowed on the front were the nurses. And there was an artillery attack and she died. Frances Slanger. Oh, this guy. Tabor Rubin.
Yeah, we're familiar.
You were familiar with him, his story? Tabor Rubin was in Buchenwald. But I found out later, Uncle Milt was at Buchenwald when it was liberated. So there's a chance that they may have brushed shoulders that day. But when he saw an American uniform liberating them, he said, I want to be one of them. So 5 years later, Korean War starts. He joined, and he had an anti-Semitic top sergeant who was determined to get him killed. And I don't know, some of the guys must know the story, but he was told to cover the retreat of his unit by himself. While they skedaddled back to the friendly lines. So what he did was he took up all the rifles of all the dead soldiers and set them up as if there were guys there, and he was able to hold off the advance of the Chinese, and he won the Medal of Honor for this.
200 dead.
200. He killed 200.
Yeah.
I don't. It's just incredible. That's right.
Hey, Norm,
Yeah.
quick question. These are great stories, wonderful. Are some of these in your book?
All of them.
That's what I thought. I missed it.
Well,
But
yeah, all of them. Most of them.
These are the substantive
Yes.
issue or the sharings that you had with Greg that are recounted in your book.
Yes. So he had a chance to read. You know, how could you not be elevated from the?
He was put up for 2 more Medal of Honor.
I didn't know that.
But the generals in charge, not generals, but like colonels, they kept getting killed. So they never went anywhere, and no one would support it, and so he never got those medals until. Anyway, he went to Korea,
Yes.
and in Korea he earned them.
Yes. The other thing about these guys, they never complained. You know, if you'd ask them about anti-Semitism, they'd say, there was talk. Bernie Barris said there was talk. My uncle said he got into a fight once with somebody, but it was, and I really didn't understand why they didn't push back more. Because I had no context. So I figured it out when I watched the movie Glory. I don't know if you've seen that, about the Black Civil War. There's a scene between Denzel Washington gets into a fight with a Union soldier because he's black. What's he doing there and all? And they start going after it. And another black, Morgan Freeman, says, he said, "Stand down, soldier. These fools are dying for you." And then it sort of registered. It didn't matter how anti-Semitic somebody was. If you're they're on our side at that time anyway. And it just startled me to see how Denzel Washington thought about it for an instant and then said, "You're right. All these racist, anti-Semites, whatever, are fighting for us, dying for us." I thought it was a moving and telling scene. All right, this is the guy I dedicated the book to. Another 2-star general, Stanley Newman of Oklahoma. Stan, this was, he flew a P-51, then he flew an F-86, then he was in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And Stan, I wanted to have some real people that Greg could identify with. So I talked to a Jewish military historian, very nice guy. I said, "You got anybody in mind that I could talk to?" And I mean, I was bold. When it came to Greg, I had no shame. I didn't. So he said, yeah, I got a guy. He was a pilot. I said, was he a lieutenant or captain? He said, no, he's a 2-star general. So I called Stan out of the blue, sight unseen. We had a 15 or 20-minute conversation. I said, Greg's going to be getting his wings advance in a couple of weeks. He said, count me in. And he showed up with his wife. Never met me, never met Greg, never talked to him, just showed up. And let me read you something about him. Well, his awards included a Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, Meritorious Service Medal, and 14 Air Medals. But this is the most impressive thing. The picture on the right. In 2013, General Newman was presented the Medal of Chevalier of the French National Order of the Legion of Honor. The award was established by Napoleon Bonaparte and is France's highest decoration. It was awarded to Newman because he took part in the liberation of France during World War II for flying support for the French First Army, as well as providing ground cover for American units during their push into Germany. One of the things that impressed me about Stan, sorry, I'm a little under the weather. At the end of the war, he was credited with 2 air victories. He had 2 German fighters in his sights, and rather than shoot them down, he forced them down. They knew that it was either that or life or death. And the way he talked about that, the fact that he didn't shoot them down impressed me more, that he restrained himself, and that it was no great victory for him to kill somebody else, but he would have done what he would have had to do. So, General Newman strongly identified himself as a Jew. During one of our many conversations, he told me about his fears of being shot down over Germany. It was not so much death he feared, but that no one would be there to say Kaddish for him. He made that sentiment, and he considers himself lucky. He's 99 years old. His kids called me after the book came out to thank me for dedicating it to him. But the other thing that was interesting, when he got out of the service, he immediately became active in his Jewish community. You know, it meant everything to him. In the same way, that guy earlier, the Confederate Major, Proskauer, did the same thing. He joined a synagogue in Charleston, South Carolina, and was very active. So they went, they knew what their roots were. Anybody know who that is?
Yeah.
Mickey Marcus. The Israelis kind of stole him when they needed a general. And it's so ironic because... Yeah, Kirk Douglas. Cast the Giant Shadow was the name of the movie. And he was a very, very a great leader. And what was ironic, he was killed because he didn't know Hebrew. And he was shot by a guard because he couldn't answer the call word. It's just terrible. But he did what he had to do, and he protected Jerusalem, the battle for Jerusalem. And they do not think they could have won that war without him. Yes. John Levittow, Medal of Honor, Vietnam. Did one of the most incredible acts of heroism that you'd ever imagine. And, well, I'll let you read about it. He saved the lives of his air crew by exposing himself to I forgot the kind of bomb, but it's the one that's burning. It's an incendiary device, and actually threw it out of the airplane. You guys from Vietnam, ever hear about him?
Yeah.
You did? Oh, these are two Israeli pilots, or no, this is one Israeli pilot who shot down 15 enemy aircraft. Here's his name, can you read it? It's in Hebrew. Oh, I know why I put him there. He met General Newman, and they exchanged scotch and war stories, Stan said. This is Greg. I bought a brick for him at the War Memorial in Lubbock. We had it last year revealed, and that's Greg is in his airplane, the F-16. I felt an obligation to honor the minorities that served in World War II. Again, because they're obscure figures. So I wanted to have one of each of the 5 major minority, including women. And I've got a good story that goes with one of them. Anybody know who Benjamin Davis was? Tuskegee Airman. He became the first black general, I believe.
Yeah.
Ira Hayes. He was he raised the flag at Iwo Jima. He raised the flag at Iwo Jima. Every Hispanic should know this, and most don't. Eugene Valencia, 27 kills. There are some of them. Very, very understated. Not much is known about most of these people. Yetta Moskowitz, Jewish girl, flew airplanes after they were manufactured. They'd fly them to the various bases. Yes, they had a name for, I can't remember the name, but gotta read my own book. But what I didn't understand was how dangerous that was. 38 women died transporting airplanes from the factory to wherever they were assigned to go. 38 women. There were crashes. And it was mostly women who did this. And Yetta lived. Yetta survived. And finally, Daniel Inouye. Senator Inouye. Yes, from Hawaii. So I gave my first talk at the Military Officer Association of America. And about 28 people. And there were some really old people there. As opposed to this group. So at the end of the receiving line, this 95, 96-year-old woman, Asian woman, came up to me and pointed at that picture and said, I knew him. I was in a Japanese internment camp with him. My father and he recruited the 442nd Regiment of Japanese Americans who fought in Italy and had the highest casualty rate of any other unit, which reminded me of the story about the Jews in Germany in World War I. So her dad and Inouye did the recruiting, got the unit together, and both served, and Inouye got a Medal of Honor. So I wanted, well, at least 4 of them are pretty obscure. But anyway, I thought that would be a fitting tribute for them. This is a good story. You see, Greg got 2 commendations. And now I'm going to cavell about, and you'll see why in a minute. This is his air medal for his combat experiences. He flew 19 missions, dropped 4 times, on time and on target, every time. You get an air medal for every 15 sorties, right? So he would have stayed longer. I mean, he would have done whatever they asked him to do. The other medal is an achievement medal. And we talk about historical irony. So part of what I do is I round on intensive care patients providing psychological services while the person is being treated medically. Because the person who recruited me to do that was a surgeon who had vision that he wanted the whole person treated. So I've done this in Lubbock since 1990. He found me in 91. I've been on the burn unit ever since. And I wanted Greg to shadow me. I said, "You got to see what I do." He said, "Absolutely not. I'm never going in that hospital with you. So just forget it. Get somebody else to shadow you." So Greg flew 19 missions. He was there for about 45 days, part of the Rocky Mountain Coalition where they rotated Air National Guard groups. So he flew, and then there was a day off. They gave him a day off between flights. So guess what he did? He volunteered at the Balad Air Force Base emergency room and sat with patients who were being triaged. Every day, every other day, he was there. And I was shocked. And the thing about it is I don't think he did it for me. I don't think he did it for me. I think he just felt obligated to do it because these people were torn up from the war, civilians and military alike. He was with a soldier from Maine when he died. And this made a deep impression on him. So when he got back, he called the parents in Maine and told them about his son at the end, which people want to know details. And then he established a scholarship with a family for one of the high school students where he went to be able to go to college. So Greg and the parents established this, and I couldn't be more proud of him. So he comes back, and I say, "Well, are you ready to go with me now?" He said, "Not in your life." To this day, he's never shadowed me. Never saw that coming. That's the day, the night he got back from Iraq, 3 a.m. He was tired. I was tired. The group came back together. It was a very nice moment. And to conclude, I had, this is supposed to be a video of, this is Robert Tuck in this plane in a 3-ship. Actually, they have a picture of him with the other 2 pilots before this. It didn't quite come through. And then I had a video of Greg's Finney flight, the last time he flew the F-16. Sorry, because I wanted to tie them together at the end of this story. So that's the story. Any questions?
We have about 3 or 4 minutes left before we need to wrap up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we'll take a few questions.
Sure. Sorry.
Want to ask about Maurice Rose, the Jewish general in World War II?
Yes, I'm aware of him. I think he's on my star, but
Okay.
he certainly deserves it. He was a combat, he was actually leading troops
Yeah, when he got shot.
when he got killed. Maurice Rose. Yes, sir.
Can you allude as to any anti-Semitism that Greg found when he went into the service?
He, during training, he had suspicions that the guy that almost washed him out, he was an IP, instructor pilot. It never came out, but Greg felt it, and any Jew kind of knows when that's going on in the back of somebody's mind. Plus, he was given a very hard time during his training. I don't want to, he got through anyway, but that and one other incident when somebody left the party he was at, after they found out he was Jewish, another officer stormed out of this party. That was it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you seem to focus and maybe it's because of Greg, solely on the Air Force or the Army.
Yeah, that's,
What about the Army and the Navy
Oh.
and Marines and all?
yes, well, take a look at the star, and you'll see the
But
people.
none of the stories are about that, right?
Oh, yeah, oh, there were.
Another book.
No, I focus most.
It's the sequel, huh?
No, maybe, I'm trying.
Part two.
Well, Timur Rubin was in the Army, I mean, what? Kraskauer was in the Army.
I didn't see any tanks, I didn't see any foot soldiers.
You know who's in the book?
Ships.
A guy named, he won, well, let me think of it. But he was a Russian tank commander and won 2 heroes of the Soviet Union. So plenty of land and sea guys. Yes.
I was gonna ask a question, but I wanna answer your question. You know, we sponsor, Jewish War Veterans sponsors the National Museum of American Jewish Military History, where all of these people, including more, have been memorialized. And I just wanted to say that, but I wanted to ask you, where is Greg now, and what does he do?
He's a president of a holding company for the bank, Southwest Capital Bank in Albuquerque. He did 10 years in the service. He wanted to make colonel, and then he had a couple of kids, and it just didn't work out. But of all the things he's ever done, he misses flying the most. He really misses that camaraderie and being at this, holding the stick of an F-16. Yes, sir.
I just want to mention that I have a cousin who is a retired 2-star Air Force general who was the youngest ever to graduate from the Air Force Academy.
Wow.
And he distinguished himself as the commanding officer of the air base at Rota, Spain, at Hickam Air Base in Hawaii, at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. He was NORAD, and
Very cool.
yeah, he distinguished himself. A little Jewish boy from Millville, New Jersey, and
It's in his blood.
yeah.
It's in his blood. Yes.
Dad, one more question.
Can you talk about the criteria that you used in selecting who you selected to put in the book?
I wanted, most of them were combat veterans, and they had to have done something extraordinary. I do have a couple of civilians, one, for example, from the Revolutionary War named Francis Salvador, who did an act of heroism that I thought was worthy of mention, even though he wasn't in the military. But by and large, they all stand head and shoulders above most of the guys who served.
Now, I can't think of the 2 guys' names, but you know that out of the last 4 chiefs of staff in the Air Force, both have been Jewish.
Yes.
That's true.
Dad, one more question. Dad, go ahead.
I just want to remind everybody that this started out, it became a book, and it's a great history lesson for all of us.
Thank you.
But it started out as love letters to your kids.
Right.
It wasn't meant to be a book, it wasn't meant
No.
to do anything to hug your kids.
That was years later,
And I
actually.
think it's exquisite.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
I think the Soviet tank commander you were talking about was Kadykov.
No, I'll get it. I'll remember it.
Okay.
But he was quite remarkable.
Another interesting factoid is that is anti-Semitic because the Russians were about 10% of their officer corps.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's, there were 500,000, somebody asked me, how many Jews are serving in Ukraine right now? And I knew the answer. There are 1,000 in the military and 200 Ukrainians who emigrated to Israel went back to fight. So there are 1,200 Jews fighting on the ground in Ukraine as we speak.
I've got 3 people that I served with that have gone back to Ukraine.
I was in the
There you go. You're Israeli?
I'm South African, but
Close
I served
enough.
in Israel. But three of the people that served with me have gone back to Ukraine.
Right. Proof positive. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I get to do the closing remarks. I'm Jeanette Pincus. I get to be currently the president of Dallas Jewish Historical Society, and I want to thank the Dallas Jewish War Veterans and the Auxiliary for such a wonderful program to partner with us. It's been terrific. This is very special for me because my father was very active, and he used to, I remember him always putting his hat on and going to the meetings. And get a little bit.
And your mom too.
Yeah, and my mom too in the auxiliary. In fact, when my father passed away, I remember going with him to the meetings. And so it's very special for me. It's a very good organization. In fact, I think it was Sandra that made sure that I pay my dues. I am part of the auxiliary. Yay. So thank you so much. So what I also want to tell you is that you can become members of us too, and there's envelopes outside. I don't think they're on the tables, but we'd love for you to join us. We have wonderful programs and events. We also love to get your stories. We do oral histories that you probably have already known, and especially our veterans. We would love to have that. I know, did Norm walk out? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, also what I want to say is a thank you special for our veterans. We have koozies, and Stephanie Balin back here. We put it as thank you for your service. We appreciate it so much. But we have a little gift. They're in the basket when you walk out. We'd love for you to take one. And now Norm has walked out, but we
he's out there ready to sign books.
Please go get his book. It sounds fabulous.
It is. It's one fun to read.
That I know it was just wonderful and very delightful for us to hear the stories, and I can't wait to get more in depth. We're also going to share our book with them, from a gift from us from the Pioneer Jewish Texans. And thank our staff too very much, Deborah, Jenny, and Jessica, also, and Joe, who we get to share. You share her, and we share her too. And so thank you so much. It's been wonderful.